Hello, this is greatjhon, and this is Air Zonk for the TG-16, submitting this for AGDQ 2020, and this is actually the Japanese version of the game I played here. This is the former world record run of the game, and I don't have the title screen on this run because if you happen to mash start at the beginning of the run, you'll be taken right into the menu where you actually pick the difficulty here. So this is sweet mode, which is the easiest difficulty, but we'll just go ahead and get started here. So there's a skip right off the bat here that if you kind of mash start right here when you're on stage 1, you'll actually skip the selection screen where you are actually selecting your buddy for the game, and you can also just select auto, which is what it will default to. So you can hear it selecting in the background, but it's like a 2-second skip. But it's one that I would reset a lot just to try to get. Happen to get it in this run. So this is Air Zonk. It is a derivative of bonk, and basically the lore is basically bringing up that Zonk is a cyborg of some sort that looks a lot like bonk on purpose. Bonk being like the mascot of the system. This was just kind of a cool, fresh take on this. And Air Zonk is a shmup, or as it is also known, a cute 'em up, because this game is very cartoony visuals. Has a lot of silly things like this cow buddy that you have right here. There's also like a little dog that you have, and some other like kind of really silly buddies that are partnering up with you. The main mechanic of this game is that you can get power-ups, and most power-ups, like main power-ups, are going to let you get hit one extra time, but they also give you the ability to like shoot a different sort of weapon, and also like when you do your charge attack, it's going to unleash a more powerful version of whatever you have equipped. So this is like cutters or boomerangs, as I like to call them. But basically, you're going to, like, when you do charge attacks with that, you're going to have like a much more powerful attack. So there is no turbo in this game. Many of the TurboGrafx-16 games will feature turbo, especially in the speedruns like Bonk, but there's actually no turbo in this game because basically all you're going to be doing is shooting constantly. So there's no need for turbo, since you're basically holding down the button to shoot when you are like rapid firing like this. Now there's definitely some strategic parts where you're not going to want to shoot all the time, because some weapons actually do generate a bit of lag. A lot of the time saves in the speedrun for this game are in the bosses, so ideally you don't see much of a boss fight at all. You're going to like be able to dodge them, keep your power up throughout the level. There's definitely a lot of challenge to making sure you can keep the power up. What makes this game really marathon safe is there's always backup power up, so you might not have your ideal power up that you want to have, but you can always get some form of a power up. So what we saw right there was actually a charge attack. If you fully charge when you're attacking, then you will actually release a bomb. In the American version, this being the Japanese version, you'll actually release a pink poop. So just something a little silly that they censored for the American audience. What I will be running is the American version, unless I can get my hands on a Japanese version for the event, but that's basically one of the main differences between the Japanese and American versions. So that was already World 1. Didn't see that boss for very long, because basically we just, on easy mode especially, you can just kind of constantly shoot at them, and as long as you've got a good power up and you can just kind of stay locked in a position where you won't get hit, you can take them out pretty quickly. Now this is one of our favorite weapons of the game, Lat Mackey and I. So this is being submitted as an any percent solo or as a race with Lat Mackey. So, but Lat Mackey and I both agree a laser and boxing glove are like the two best weapons in this game. So the power-ups in some levels are definitely fixed as to what you're going to be able to get, and we will strategically get whatever power-up is best in this run. It just happens that laser is one here. laser is going to be featured heavily in round 4 because it is a very quick kill on that boss, and it's basically one of the only power-ups you can get in that level that's not one that generates a lot of lag. So we're actually going to have the dog buddy here. I think I might have a power-up ability in this run. If you collect 7 smileys, you get your buddy, and that's how you get to summon your buddy on the screen, and they'll just shoot enemies with you. But they'll also get hit by enemies. So you have to try to keep him alive just by moving around the screen, making sure you're not putting him right into harm's way. That's something actually that I did on the first boss, was like deliberately put the buddy in harm's way so that I would get extra hits on the boss. We'll see that a few times in this run. But one thing you can do is you can transform and turn into your buddy, and you'll have temporary invincibility, so it's a really good bonus. But you'll also have then a powered up attack that you will continue until you get hit again. And if you do happen to get hit, then you will basically revert to whatever power-up you had before that. Now, there is some time loss that happens for that, but it's a lot of fun. It's something that we would definitely show off at the event, like a buddy transform. And some of these sections, especially in World 2, can get a little chaotic. Like, this would be a great time to transform, just to have to avoid all of this. But that's one thing about the speedrun, is that we generally would try to avoid those transformations unless we can get some benefit out of it. I believe this run has, at the end of World 3, a transformation where I will get that and actually exploit it to kill the boss faster at the end. So I've got the boxing glove power-up, as I call it. I think it might be called like punching glove or something, but essentially this boxing glove is a super powerful weapon. It will shoot all the way across the screen no matter where you are. If you get in close with an enemy, I believe it gets some extra hits in. So on this particular boss, we're kind of like sneaking in close to these snakes and trying to get some extra hits in. Like I said, some of the biggest time saves will be on these mid-bosses and the end bosses of each stage. And essentially, because the end of this run is just what amounts to a big giant boss rush, like with some stages in between, that's where a lot of the big time save happens, is in World 5. And it also means that World 5 ends up being basically just as long as the rest of the run leading up to it. Another thing that makes this run particularly marathon safe is this is an easy run, especially like once you kind of know the mechanics of the game. You're not going to be losing a lot of lives. See, I already have 6 lives here. The max you can get is 9, and we'll definitely be getting up to that like 9 life threshold. Dying very rarely in this run, and one reason that you'll die rarely is because once you have a power up and you get hit, then you're basically just losing the power up. So you can go and get another power-up and just try not to get hit in the meantime. And even losing lives isn't too big of a deal, because once you get into later stages of the game, you're going to have so many lives. And there's actually something that happens in the very last fight that you will get 9 lives automatically for the very last fight of the game. So even if you're getting pretty low, the last fight is fairly difficult, but then you won't have to worry about it as much. So you can see the power of the boxing glove here, where it's just like destroying him. And see, I'm leading my buddy right into the boss there. Their movement is fairly random. It's just you can kind of lead them in the direction you might want them to go. So ideally, you're getting them right in the boss hitbox there, which I did, and that fight ended up going really fast. Now, I said that this was the former world record run. There's actually a newer world record that gets into 26, actually. So that was just recently acquired. So there's going to be some more interest in this game, I think, because we want to see how much time we can optimize here in this run. But Lat Mackie and I have a really close time. We both kind of traded the world records back and forth here. So it would be a very close race. It's one that we were consistently kind of trading back and forth whenever we did race this game. So again, you're seeing the boomerang or like cutter weapon. And this is a very good one for this early stage. And we're seeing another one of the buddies here. I think this is the buddy I prefer to have. It seems that you get one of two buddies, especially when you do the auto selection option at the beginning of the game. And this is the one I prefer for this one because it's just got a larger hitbox and kind of a more powerful attack. The other one being a baseball, with this being a baseball themed level. So we're reaching the mid-boss of the game. This is another great one to have for the cutter weapon, the boomerang. Because it basically just makes quick work of it. Barely even knew there was a boss there. So what you'll see, and I do get those several times in the run, is that small Zonk item that is the power-up is something I tend to try to avoid because it's nice because it makes you have a smaller hitbox and you get to shoot both in front of and behind you, but there's a couple downsides to it too. Because one thing you might notice is that if an enemy comes from behind me in this run, I will basically have like turbo jets on my feet that hit them. And you don't get that when you get the small Zonk power-up. So that's something that we'll try to avoid that. And like one of the other major problems with the small Zonk is when you get hit, you don't lose that power-up like a lot of the other power-ups, and instead you will just die. So you get basically a trade-off there where you get to have a smaller hitbox and you get to have a lot of shots shot off, but then you won't get that backfire ability, which we'll see at several points in this run. And then also, like, you'll lose that power-up. Now, when I'm going for this buddy, see, I'm like kind of strategically waiting for this big smiley to be here because I want it to be like as late in the run as possible in this level, because right now we're kind of just like being taken directly to the boss. So I'm in this invincible mode right now, and I just want to get in the boss's hitbox and attack him, and it will make quick work of this first phase. Now I'll carry the invincibility on into the next phase, but I don't think it gets on screen in time, which is expected. But even then, you can see like the hitbox that I get with that special ability. You barely even got to see the boss come on screen there. So that's something I like to try to time and get those smileys in such a way, because you want to get 7, and you already have to have your buddy. And you can always skip one of those big smileys that show up and kind of plan when you want to do it. So this is World 4, and we're going to be getting the laser here, and we basically have to hold this on for the whole level. And we want to hold on to this because it's really amazing for the final boss. We want to have it at the very end. Now, unfortunately, this is actually a fairly difficult section to maintain that power-up because there's just a lot of bullets happening on screen. There's enemies coming from behind. You can get trapped pretty fast. But that's kind of why I'm using this charge attack, because it will have, you know, more projectiles shooting out on the screen and getting these guys cleared away as quickly as possible. Now we're coming up on the mid-boss here pretty soon, and that's another tough section that is possible to lose this power-up. And so you just want to make sure we handle that in a smart way, and also make sure we don't get that small Zonk power-up right there, because that would basically ruin us collecting that laser power-up. Alright, so this mid-boss looks like a pushover, but basically as soon as you get into the second phase, he's going to shoot like crazy, and you have to avoid that attack. But as long as you can stay close to him with that laser, you can make quick work of him. And that's why we want the laser for him too. Now this next section is one of the few vertical sections of the game. And it can get quite difficult because you need to avoid these platforms. And it becomes difficult with some of those enemies right there because they'll kind of pull you toward them. And you actually could see my buddy getting hit there. Now see, that's that's one of the scarier parts of the run, especially if you're kind of always having the shoot button held down, is that you're going to get these power-ups flying across the screen that you don't want. So then you got to dodge through them. One way to avoid that is to not just shoot constantly, but sometimes I get antsy. There's another one I'm like, oh man, got to get away from that. Because I've definitely picked that one up going into this boss fight. And then go, no! I think that one tends to catch me more than anything else, though. Alright, so we are closing in on round 4's boss. You can see me taking out those guys on the left wall with the backfire attack with my boots there. We'll actually be using that against this boss. It's one way to make quick work of it. And now we will see why it's amazing to have the laser. So this boss's hitbox isn't active yet, but then it is as soon as you can see it starts flashing. And then we're already done with the first phase. Now the second phase can actually be pretty tricky, but again, if we have the laser and we've got him set up in a good way, and we've got our buddy kind of hanging out in the hitbox, we're just going to destroy him pretty quickly. Now it gets pretty hectic if you don't have that particular power up. If you have like cards or lightning. Now here's the cards power up, and I actually really love it for this section because there's just so many enemies on screen. Cards can be a little bit of a laggy weapon, but with all the sprites on the screen on this level, which is actually it's pretty nice that like so many sprites on the screen don't necessarily lag it too badly. But you're just adding a whole bunch more once you have all these cards. Speaking again for the marathon safety here is that like now I'm sitting on 8 lives and I think I'm going to be getting another one soon. And I haven't lost a life yet. I don't think I've even lost a power-up in this run. Because the sweet difficulty tends to be pretty easy to avoid getting hit. There's a lot of very consistent stages, and the boss fights can go pretty quickly if you've got the right power-up. Now where things can go south is in the boss rush especially, but it's still pretty manageable. Now what we're going to be going for is another consistent theme of this run is we want to get that boxing glove. So as soon as we're able to get the boxing glove power up, that's the one we want to keep and have as far as we can. There is going to be a 4th section where we're going to lose our power up, but we will maintain this boxing glove until that section. Boxing glove will make very quick work of this series of mini bosses that we're facing right here. So we haven't talked much about the story in this game because the story is fairly thin, but what you need to know is ultimately we're going after King Drool. He's in this game too, not just Bonk. But he's got these very Bonk-like cyborgs that are fighting us here, which I've affectionately called Mohawk Bonk and Big Head Bonk. Now Big Head Bonk resembles the meat power-up Bonk in Bonk's Adventure, Bonk's Revenge. I think it's more of Bonk's Revenge style, but I don't know if I actually know the names of the enemies as part of the lore. But I do know King Drool is still King Drool. Now, this is actually a throwback to Bonk's Adventure right here, is that we've got this very prehistoric looking level. It's very interesting. And we're going to see a twist on this, because it's like, well, what exactly is going on here? Kind of looks like it's made of metal, or it's like a projection of some sort. And so we're going to work through this section, which is actually pretty difficult. There's a lot of projectiles going on. And then at the end, they kind of ramp up the difficulty. They've got meteors, they've got dinosaurs, they got these things appearing on screen. It gets really hectic really fast. I actually just lost my power up. So as it turns out, one of the twists in this game is, well, we're actually kind of in the underbelly of Drool's fortress here. And this was all kind of just an illusion, and everything's still just a bunch of robots. We've got robot bushes, we've got robot dinosaurs, robot backgrounds. And even the spinning meteorites here look to be robotic. And so a lot of these enemies will be actually very familiar if you know the Bonk series. Is basically, these are just forms of the Bonk enemies as robots. Now again, we're getting the boxing glove and we're wanting to try to keep it, but as you can see, it gets pretty chaotic with all these projectiles on screen. Thankfully, we discovered, as long as you clear out a lot of these enemies, you can kind of hang out in this bottom area and it's fairly safe. And now we're moving on to the next mini-boss, which is what I call Big Head Bonk. And here's where we see that backfire really working in our favor, because basically all we're doing is hitting him with that, and he'll just like get knocked out. Just a few hits with the boxing glove and that, and make quick work of him. So going into this boss rush with a power-up is pretty crucial, because you just save a lot of time like facing these bosses again. Because what happens right here is you're not going to get a free power-up for a while. They will show some random power-ups here. The thing is, they won't really show up unless you need the power-up. So you would have gotten a power-up here, kind of come across the screen. So if we did get hit, that's another thing that speaks to the safety of this game, is they're going to try to give you those power-ups. Now, they will be random. You definitely won't get a boxing glove like every time, or a laser. But sometimes you'll get lucky. So that's actually something that was pretty unfortunate. Was I wanted to keep that boxing glove, but instead I got this little Bonk power-up. So I'm going to make do with this, and I'm grumbling about it a bit in the PB, but I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to go with it. And as it turns out, like, I end up doing pretty well on this first boss. First phase of the third boss, at least. Now I'm anticipating a power-up here, which I do end up getting. And I do like the cards. I'm not really sure how good they work on the fourth boss, but you know, it's not like the laser or the boxing glove, but it's at least a decent weapon for this fight. Now, as you can see, I'm doing that fully powered up poop attack, and what that's doing is just clearing out all the enemies on the screen, and in this case, just doing extra damage to him. Alright, we're getting back to that flower guy, and as you see, I'm just doing that back attack again and just completely obliterating him. On this particular run, I was, 22 seconds ahead of my last time. And this was the, as I said, the former world record run. So this did stand for a while, but then we actually got a new runner, Sarah Carey, that ended up beating this time. So we have, I think, 3 or 4 different Air Zonk runners at the time. So at this part is actually pretty interesting, because you don't actually have to kill any of these enemies. You can just kind of stay at the bottom. So it's a nice breather after some of these more difficult boss fights. And it's just one of those times where you can just like take a break and hang out at the bottom. And you can kill some of them. It's just you don't want to be really attacking those guys in the bubbles. Because if you're attacking those guys in the bubbles, they're releasing a lot more projectiles on screen. You just have to clean up more. You're more likely to lose your power up. And at the time of this record, we were thinking we really enjoyed having this laser power up, so we wanted to keep it as far into the run as we could, or far into this section as possible.
Yeah, there's a bit of lag reduction too. It's mostly just killing enemies.
So there is an opportunity to get some more power ups here, including a boxing glove. But at the time that I did this run, we were favoring the laser. And so kind of the strat I had here was like, hey, I don't want any of these power-ups, so I'm just kind of bypassing all of this.
We're not like super expert.
Now here's a twist on the boss fight that we had to do earlier, is now we have to fight both of these guys at the same time. Mechanics of this fight is I generally try to go for the Mohawk guy because he's actually more dangerous, has much more dangerous projectiles. And I was really hoping to keep the laser even going through into the drool fight here, but I managed to get hit right at the end and lose it. But you can do pretty well with just the pea shooter in this fight, because essentially you're getting this set up for the final fight. And there's a pretty consistent way to avoid that little laser going across the screen, because if you're in the wrong position, it can kind of circle around you and prevent you from shooting. So this is the final fight, and this is King Drool. And so this should look somewhat familiar. If you've seen Bonk's Adventure, you've got different things firing projectiles at you. But they're all going to form together to make the robot Drool. And now the best way to deal with this boss, especially since we don't have any power up, is to do this charge shot and try to hit him with all those projectiles at once. But as you can see, we've got to avoid all these other projectiles that are happening on the screen. Now you see the little green thing that's kind of spinning around me. That will actually prevent me from shooting just the regular pea shooter, and that's why we do this charge shot. Now you can do a fully charged shot there too, and that will end up hitting him as like basically shooting everything on the screen. But it's just a little bit quicker to kind of get these charge shots off. And ideally, you're not getting hit at all or not dying. I think that's my only death in this fight. But that's the end right there. Basically, that's what that fight's supposed to look like. And ideally, you're not dying too much. And that's the end of Air Zonk. It's a pretty safe run. Like I said, you'll get those 9 free lives at the end there, so you will have a lot of chances, even if you're not doing so well. I only ended up dying, once or twice in that final fight, but you'll basically see that it's pretty easy to kind of play that safe and kind of hang back. But I think that's gonna be it for me. This is greatjhon, and just thanks for consideration for AGDQ, and good night.